Well, friends, thanks for being here to listen to these ideas that I've put together. I realize that this is actually a very large subject, talking about a civilization, and certainly one that we've just begun. And I just thought I should mention that due to the largeness of the topic, I'm not going to say probably as much as some people would like about science in the Aquarian age. There is a wonderful article called Aquarian Spirituality, which probably will be taken up by this group if it hasn't already. And it's very informative about the, and very directed to the idea of science. But for today, just because it's sometimes helpful to start with a definition, I have a short one about civilization. I chose 3 different versions of, or rather different sources who present the idea in different ways. But civilization is a state of human society that is very developed and organized. Sometimes it's referring to the technology of modern civilization. It's also a state of society with well-developed organizations, including its government, its laws, and its arts. A definition I particularly favor is that it's the process of educating society so that its culture becomes more developed. And sometimes it's actually somewhat the same as culture itself. Society, its culture, and its way of life during a particular time or period or in a particular part of the world. So my take on it is that we do a lot to develop what we have in our culture. And as we talk about it today, I think we'll find a lot of it certainly has to do with ideas and values and what we develop because of those values that we hold. So that's for a little clarity, and now I'll start with my remarks. It's characteristic of the one who has the spirit of the Aquarian age to have a recognition of and a gratitude toward the progenitors, the teachers of the spiritual heritage of humanity. It is an Aquarian position as well to see ourselves as evolving members of the global community of the future. Human beings willing to serve and open to learning and to discovering our untapped spiritual potential. H.P. Blavatsky helps us begin our journey in understanding this. She describes the process of the immense evolution and evolving intelligence guided by the divine descent of teachers during early humanity. She writes in The Secret Doctrine in Volume 2. Our races have sprung from divine races, from Manu taught Hermes down to Plato and Panodorus. All tell us of 7 divine dynasties, of the 7 primitive and dual gods who descend from their celestial abode and reign on earth, teaching mankind astronomy, architecture, and all other sciences that have come down to us. There were 5 Hermes, or rather 1, who appeared, as some Manus and Rishis did, in several different characters. Now, Hermes gave the laws of the 7 kingdoms of nature. He was the first to teach magic to Egypt and Greece. As Hermes Trismegistus, we are told, he is the archetype of both incarnated men and order in nature. He is, quote, the paradigm of the soul powers of mankind and intelligence in the hierarchies of nature. This is from a passage in a great teacher article on Balsilides from Hermes. His teaching was of the divine gnosis, vidya, true science. It was a science of primary causes and taught with a recognition of noetic consciousness. Through the work of Hermes in our evolution, humanity assimilated spiritual wisdom and the science of magic into the human principle of Karana Sharira. And as is stated in the article on Aquarian Civilization in Gupta Vidya, the Karana Sharira is the ground of latent knowledge called to active potency by Hermes. It becomes the basis for understanding oneself as a source of harmony, a logoic being. The experience of this event in our history accounts for the fact that to this day, there are persistent intuitions in human beings, soul memories from the earliest golden ages. This is even so in our postmodern era. For example, a few decades ago, a song reminded us of the golden age aspects of the Aquarian age into which we have transitioned. This is the verse from the song Aquarius. Harmony and understanding, sympathy and trust abounding. No more falsehoods or derisions. Golden living dreams of visions. Mystic crystal revelations. And the mind's true liberation. It is certainly an aspiration after a vibrant ideal of harmony, clear mind, and truth. Sri Raghavan Iyer in Parapolitics writes that there are sacred and secular spheres in the world's great civilizations. And there are parapolitical ideals and visions held by the people of such civilizations. We use the example of India first. In India, tradition gives tribute to the million-year-old storytelling of the kingship of Rama. The time was a very important period for humanity. We're told in the article Aquarian Civilization that Hermes was the paradigm of the oldest sacred tradition of the mystery schools of India. They laid the basis for the monastic development, for the development of the human mind, of the seminal civilizations of the fifth race. There are markers in the intellectual history of the more recent civilizations that also show that the influence of Hermes persists. Although alchemy disappeared and authentic occult arts disappeared over time, we notice from the classical and the Renaissance eras that traditions of knowledge and wisdom continued in a variety of ways. There were the 900 years of the Platonic Academy. The early Muslims of Cordoba and the pupils of these scholars, these Muslim scholars, were in Italy and France. The University of Oxford was founded, and all, we are told in Aquarian Civilization article, we're told that they all struggled understanding what they referred to as the seven sciences, the trivium and the quadrivium. And these had been brought in from the classical period. But these have been attached to universities since the 12th century. Another event was that John Wycliffe translated and offered the Bible in the English language, and he helped to bring knowledge to thousands of people. Now in this civilization, there continues to be an opening up of the former closed circle regarding knowledge in general and regarding translations and availability of sacred text as well. In Europe, there was the example of Copernicus, who rediscovered the laws of Pythagorean wisdom. And more recently, in the life of Mahatma Gandhi, our civilization has witnessed an exemplary or extraordinary exemplar of the pursuit of disinterested truth. Yet it is largely the case in the civilization of the West that we have had, through decadence, the disappearance of active human memory of the greatest epochs of antiquity. So what critique, what historical explanation can we offer of civilization as we find it in our era? We notice the effect on our self-identity and the pale, fragmented state of our knowledge as compared to what was once known. And a good part of our source concerning what was once known is theosophy. Latter-day sciences are a fragment of the systematic ontology and epistemology of Theosophia. We have a foreshortened view of history. In our last 200 years particularly, we have propagated a very truncated view of the history of the emergence and growth of civilization. What are some historical reasons behind this in the civilization of the West? H.P. Blavatsky, in some of her writings, especially towards the end of her life when she was talking about the new cycle, she wrote that for 2 millennia, or she wrote about the fact that for 2 millennia, we have been developing a messianic, acquisitive, and parochial civilization. Our historical perspective on the last 2,000 years of history emphasizes materiality, power, and violence. This we would call the legacy of an Atlantean delusion about bigness and power. Perhaps this extends into our rush towards technology, especially since the war period during the last century. Hence, the degrading of the mind principle is of great concern. in our current civilization. In her essay, The New Cycle, HPP has us understand about the dead weight to the adherence of the influence, or rather the influence of the idea of original sin, obvious in religion, yet it is also in our time, in the secular realm, very obvious through the propagation of behaviorism. We would like to share a short but intense portrait from Parapolitics Toward the City of Man, where we read, contemporarily, people are inhibited by the roles, the delusions of an atomized, impersonal, industrial civilization, one that is militantly defended by the inflated ideologies of competing nation states. So it's a comment that certainly encapsulates a lot, but it sounds quite familiar. This makes sense in connection with the comment by Mahatma Gandhi that history, as ordinarily conceived, is a grandiose record of the interruptions of soul force. So several questions arise, we think, at least, from this discussion and criticism of our civilization, and they are posed in the essay on Aquarian Civilization too. One is the measure of wisdom postulated by our current culture that we have defective and needlessly restrained. So, in other words, are we taking advantage of what we actually have as members of the fifth race? And another question is, can we cast off social structures and ways of thinking and acting that are outworn and hindrances to the humanity and societies of the future? Robert Crosby wrote about the imparting of knowledge to humanity in this era. This comes from some of his remarks in answers to questions on the ocean of theosophy. He says, excuse me, I have an error message. No problem. He says, when an age of transition arrives, when people's governments, religions, and sciences are changing, as they now are, the time arrives for an incomparable greater revealing by those who know of the nature of man and the laws that govern the evolution of all things. One of the results of understanding a deeper, more complete, and more meaningful history of humankind is to understand that the regeneration of global civilization can come about by the sharing of the knowledge and wisdom of Theosophia. There would be a regeneration of self-identity. We spoke of the work of Hermes that is continuous in the civilization of humanity. And in Aquarian Civilization, Sri Raghavan Iyer's essay, we find that civilization in the current cycle can see a fundamental recognition of the relationship of the celestial and the terrestrial. In other words, it's a burgeoning interest and recognition Further, our civilization can forge this through a living link in the psychological realm. And the third observation is that the link is man. This would be a recovery within human nature of all orders of being. So we understand from the myths of antiquity to our postmodern time that ideas and institutions underlie the views of diverse civilizations. They recognize hierarchies of beings, such as one once was widely known as the Great Chain of Being. They recognize levels of evolution, the laws of nature, and the central harmony of the cosmos. Also, they speak to the question, what are our human obligations and what our moral responsibility? Further, they define individual excellence and collective progress. A philosophical idea that would be foundational to the burgeoning Aquarian society of the future would be the recognition that man is a microcosm who mirrors the invisible universe that is around him and beyond him. This brings a most valuable attitude, a reverence for nature, for nature's laws, and for our fellow human beings. In the philosophies of Pythagoras and Pico della Mirandola, we find their expression, man is the measure of all things. In this, we would contemplate the article by Sri Raghavan Iyer called Mirroring the Macrocosm. It appeared in the volume, The Society of the Future. Let's see if we have a quote. Would someone like to read aloud the passage from Mirroring the Microcosm?
I could read it
Oh.
unless somebody else wants to.
Well, Maurice said he would do it. Thank you, John.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Mirroring the macrocosm. Man is the center of a series of concentric circles, of little worlds extending from here and now to the infinite expanse of space and time. Man is a microcosm in many senses and in different dimensions of his complete individuality. His family is a small macrocosm, the range and heritage and hereditary character of which he reflects in his own being. Each day in his life is like a miniature eon, during which he emanates and absorbs fresh currents of thought and energy. This is the attitudes and characteristics of his neighborhood, his locality, his village or city, his province, and his country. As a member of present-day humanity and of the contemporary world, man embodies the trends and forces that constitute the matrix of this great macrocosm. Man's life in a particular personality reveals the spirit of the age to which he belongs.
Thank you. So we see a requirement for rediscovery within human nature of all orders of being, and even recognition of the great chain of being, seems to be a reverence for life and truth. And we have here a statement from Dr. Albert Schweitzer from early in the last century. Reverence for life, which I apply to my own existence, and reverence for life, which keeps me in a temper of devotion to other existence than mine, interpenetrate each other. At the prelude to the Aquarian age, HPB spoke of aspects of the change in the new age that would represent intellectual and moral reform on behalf of all beings. In the New Cycle essay, she took to task the intense bourgeois materialism and ideas of ontological scarcity prevalent in the late 19th century. She gave philosophical support to humanity's possibilities to transmute each aspect of human nature, of the human principles, to become then a center of consciousness. She also spoke of this, and the student found it interesting, as an opportunity for self-dependence. It's not an isolation that she was speaking of. It has more to do with a kind of taking responsibility, a mature, fully conscious human being of the Aquarian age. So we have this following passage that she wrote in 1888. Would anyone else like to read aloud for this passage from HPB?
I could read.
Okay.
1888, HPB. The American transcendentalists discovered that life could be very. Start over. 1888, HPB. The American transcendentalists discovered that life could be made a sublime thing without any assistance from circumstances or outside sources of pleasure and prosperity. Of course, this had to been discovered many times before, and Emerson only took up again the cry raised by Epictetus. But every man has to discover this fact freshly for himself, and when once he realized it, he knows that he would be a wretch if he did not endeavor to make the possibility a reality in his own life. The Stoic became sublime because he recognized his own absolute responsibility and did not try to evade it. The Transcendentalist was even more, because he had faith in the unknown and untried possibilities which lay within himself. The occultist fully recognizes the responsibility and claims his title by having both tried and acquired knowledge of his own possibilities.
So this is interesting that she comes to speak of the occultist, and here we could think of what has been written already about the Aquarian age by Theosophists in literature of the 20th and the 21st century, that this is to both try and acquire knowledge, and that would be of our own possibilities, which is a theme that we have from the masters and from the great teachers, that so often in every civilization, humanity does not recognize what is truly possible in terms of spiritual evolution for the whole of the race. Well, we know from classical times that Plato depicted the regeneration of civilization as coming about with the restoration of a golden age. Plato spoke of it as a time of universal well-being, wherein all human relationships mirrored the cosmic hierarchies of invisible nature. It certainly sounds like the beautiful harmony that was spoken of or was sung about in the song Aquarius. As students of theosophy, we readily recognize the significance of the operation of evolutionary cycles and recognize the aspects of the Kali Yuga. Even with rule-governed societies such as ours that relies on rules to restrain vices, we can envision a societal change because rule-governed societies also reflect ideals of times of devotion to teachers and to ethical leaders. It is the case of this beginning of the Aquarian age that there is a movement to learn from and respect teachers. It is a progressive aspect of the period to consider that as the Aquarian age moves along, there will be initiations into Aquarian sanghas, academies, and lodges of the future. So from considering only some of the beneficent theosophical writing on the Aquarian civilization and the Aquarian age, we notice in summary that this age includes some characteristics that stand out and certainly promise an adventure for all of us. We wrote that there would be new ethics on global awareness and connection, cooperation, the ability to draw the larger circle, the ability to put aside competitiveness. We see the end of the former forms of monasticism, yet we see many experiments, many small intentional communities abounding in our countries across the globe. We see an openness to universal truths, a learning enthusiasm, a learning hyphen enthusiasm, and a time, as it is said in Gupta Vidya, a time hospitable to the Platonic Upanishadic method, a method, of course, of learning from teachers. So we would close with these words from Rilke, the poet Rilke. The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That was beautiful, noetic. Just in the selection of quotes and also the writing that you did between them to weave them all together, just beautiful writing. Thank you so much for that. And as Jenny said, it's a huge topic.
It is a huge topic.
And Jenny, will you entertain some questions? I think we have about a half an hour. So that's a good time for conversation.
Well, I'm here for conversation. I'm hoping that because of all the very wonderful students in the audience, we'll do it as a team effort if we need to. And so we should do it. Have questions and comments.
I could start you off with a question. Would you say that Aquarian and theosophical are almost interchangeable? Like if you saw the word theosophical in a sentence, or you saw the word Aquarian in a sentence, are they almost the same thing?
Well, I think, of course, Theosophical is since the beginning of humanity, the beginning of time practically. So we have had Theosophy, Theosophia through many, many ages. But there's something about the symbol of Aquarius that is so in line with the purpose of Theosophy. I'm thinking about the Aquarius who can summon in his water-carrying pot this electric kind of liquid that is shared with all humanity, sharing something that humanity is very much in need of, the knowledge, wisdom. So there's something about the symbol of Aquarius that is hearkening to what any human being who learns Theosophy would resonate. But someone else should also chime in. What made you think, Jonathan, what made you think of trying to
Make the
size
connection.
them together?
Well, in my opening remarks, I was mentioning that just interesting that Theosophy in this phase of the giving out of Theosophy, as you said, Theosophy is extremely ancient, beyond ancient, but it's just interesting that the more modern version of it that we're familiar with is introduced right prior to the Aquarian age. So I was just thinking that I was wondering about that. Like let's say Theosophy talks about karma, cycles, and so forth, responsibility, things like that. Isn't that inherently Aquarian, or not?
Well, I don't know. Anytime, see, we have an idea of what Theosophy is, and
Mhm.
it's the best we can do with our experience, the, kind of comparing what we have been exposed to, even from different cultures around the world, and even different historical periods of time, we do the best we can because it makes a lot of difference to us, because we value it, to try to understand what Theosophy is, or Theosophia, which we cannot actually truly embrace in all its glory and the light it brings. So that's the case. But it's always good to, Krishna has this comment, something about he never appears in the same way twice, or he doesn't bring a solution or a response in the same way twice. And so I think what's good about the Aquarian mode is it's encouraging an adventure in thought and courage and sacrifice for other human beings on this earth, and sacrifice for the rest of nature. Do that in order to try to discover who we are and how we can be fully spiritual beings. And so it's in some ways I could say the same thing about theosophy. That's what it's trying to do. I remember years ago in the late 80s, Sri Raghavan Iyer talked a little bit of, he talked about global pointers and politics, international politics. And then he said, perestroika is pure theosophy. And I just kind of shocked. Did I hear that? And it just kind of indicates that if we get to the depth and motivation and vision of something, it almost doesn't matter which term we use. I see
Yeah,
some hands.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Robert?
I was just going to mention that it's Aquarian is theosophical, but it's not theosophy because theosophy is so vast. I mean, the entire secret doctrine that H.P. Blavatsky wrote is like a tile from the temple of truth, as she says.
Yeah.
So Jenny was missing that that you have these unique manifestations, but theosophy is virtually boundless. And it's just that it seems like in the Aquarian age, there is the opportunity for the manifestation of the qualities of the human soul and human excellence to manifest. And in that way, divine wisdom finds expression. So those are just some thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you. Very well said.
Do you want to take a question from Desiree?
Yeah.
Hi. Hi there. Curiously, she wrote in the esoteric characters of the Gospels a little phrase about the Aquarian age. She writes, when it enters in a few years, the sign of Aquarius, psychologists will have some extra work to do, and the psychic idiosyncrasies of humanity will enter on a great change. I wonder what she meant by that. Any comment from anyone?
On the psychic idiosyncrasy.
I have an additional question. I'm sorry I'm on a telephone, so I can't raise my hand, but that really sparked something for me. Because Jenny, you made a mention of behaviorism in your presentation.
Yes.
And I'm just really curious about this because it just seems like since around the time of Freud, there's been a whole focus on the internal world that is a subjective reality that is observable through behavior. And so as a result of that, we have a psychological profession, or discipline that is focused on asking people to describe, their internal experiences, which may be influenced by their environment. And I think, the thing about behaviorism is that, especially with Skinner's radical behaviorism, he was just saying that that internal events don't necessarily have to do with they aren't necessarily explanatory. They don't necessarily, if you ask a person, like Dr. Iyer once said, if you ask a sick person to talk about his being sick, you're only going to make him sicker. I'm sorry, that's a bad paraphrase, but I've always been curious about what the connection might be between, the science of observable behavior and the psychology of the soul.
Okay. The intersection of the science of observable behavior and the science of the soul. And there's a lot in that question about external and internal. And it is interesting that Freud he was somewhat instrumental in getting people to at least acknowledge the importance of the internal. Do you have anything to offer on that, Jenny?
Well, I was just thinking that I was surprised to realize through reading several Hermes essays, and I think one of them was the 7 deadly sins coming out of Christianity. This and the doctrine of original sin. It's problematic for a theosophist because to realize this, well, first of all, the recognition that I had was that behaviorism is in the secular disciplines, so to speak, just a version of original sin. And that being that truly there is no great potentiality of the soul, that things are mechanical with respect to what happens when we have an opportunity to live a life on earth, that we have no true power of choice. And that, it's this idea of ontological scarcity. The scarcity in this case is about our internal capabilities and the potential beauty and development of our soul. I obviously I have that concern about behaviorism. Also that there, in a sense, when we take up a position like that, we're sort of saying there's reason for humanity to despair. And there may be, if you just looked at superficial cases and problems, but you can't see what's really going on. You can't really see the karma and of any given being. So that's just some impressions. I'm not speaking so much to, is it Nathan? I saw your telephone signal. I'm not really speaking to exactly what you asked for. Somebody like Maurice might know more because he's studied Freudian psychology, etc. But that's what I have to offer. So.
Just one comment there. A lot of these scientific theories are really an extension of the Piscean model more than they are the Aquarian age, it seems, because they're really pseudoscience. And it's not the science that's really going to unfold as the full powers of the human being start to unfold, it seems, because materialism really is an extension of the idea that we are not godlike human beings fundamentally. And this is what you just mentioned about the full beauty of the soul and about ontological scarcity. In other words, if our source of being is inherently from matter, then that's really a scarce orientation, and it's based on limited everything, really. So in other words, the Piscean age had the idea that we are all created by an external creator. So therefore we're kind of a moldable lump of clay. Well, isn't that materialism? So then naturally you're going to get, once you start getting the authority of the psychological establishment kind of making claims about the future of science and so forth, but really it's a throwback, you could say, to the Piscean model of creators and creation. I don't know if that was made clear, but we've got two people with a symbol of D here. And the first one is Diane Martin, and the second one is David.
I
Diane?
would really like to follow up on that some more, though.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Diane, do you mind waiting for Nathan to follow up on his question a little bit more?
Of course not. Go ahead.
Nathan?
Because I've really been, pondering this for many years. And having heard Dr. Iyer say that the problem with B.F. Skinner is not so much that he's right, it's that if we follow his approach, and I don't have an exact quote of what he said, but that he might be right if we go down that road. And so I've been kind of for my career, I've been averse to considering Skinner's philosophy just out of respect for Dr. Iyer. But the thing about it is that when we think about the scientific method, that's something that this radical behaviorism actually has in a way that the psychotherapeutic Freudian approach does not have. And the Freudian psychology is based on a subjectivity that is not like the objective idealism of theosophy or some kind of Buddhic intuition. It's based on whatever somebody says, and then we listen to them. We say, oh, that must be terrible. That's traumatic. And so the whole idea is that we just listen to people talk about their problems, and we really have no solutions. Whereas this Skinnerian stuff is actually based on principles that have been observed with behavior with animals and how animals respond, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a case that there's no free will. I mean, I know that Skinner wrote all this stuff about beyond free will, and I don't exactly know what. It's going to be taking me a while to think about this, but I'm just saying.
Why don't you let Jenny kind of respond to what you said so far, if that's okay?
Okay.
It's going to be Maurice.
Well, I wanted to just say first to Desiree's question, which we never answered or attempted to respond to, about the fact that psychologists are going to have this problem. And then, as Nathan has pointed out, and I think that's because when you enter a new age, like the age of Aquarius, there are certain challenges that come up. And to human beings, as I think the Bhagavad Gita points out, really, in the whole Kali Yuga, the challenge is the war within the mind, in manas. And so in order to keep a sound mind, a soundness of mind, there's going to be this precipitation of karma because of the excesses of the age and the excesses of the prior ages. And that's going to put a real challenge on the mind having to be the sifter. But then the question is, which mind are we talking about, the higher mind or the lower mind? And as Einstein, I think, said, you can't solve the problem with the same paradigm that got you into the problem. So the behaviorists and the Skinner people, it's not that they're necessarily wrong, but they're just talking about the lower mind. And the lower mind doesn't deal with a unified field. It deals with objects and creates a fragmentation of consciousness where people are just grasping for pleasure or pain, and behavioral reinforcement, like through advertising and subliminal advertising, gets us there. And that causes more pain because the mind loses its identity or its coherence or any kind of defining governing principle. So you actually lose self-governance in a way. And so that becomes a real challenge to psychologists. So I think the real challenge of the mind is trying to have a continuity of consciousness with the higher mind. But that's just my reaction. I know others want to speak, so.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like,
That's like real
could I just-
psychology. I just want to say that is not Skinnerian and it's not Freudian. It's theosophical.
that was, and
Well,
also,
it is, I would say though that Man's Search for Meaning, who's Viktor Frankl, for example, who's a logotherapist and who's a recognized psychologist, did have that third way. And even Abraham Maslow probably pointed to some things too. So it's not negating psychology, but even psychologists have seen that there are kind of a higher principle of man beyond just material effects and reactions.
Diane Martin.
I was wanting to go back to what Desiree also asked about the psychiatrists having extra work to do. I think we're making this transition into developing the Buddhic nature, and that implies understanding and loving each other better if we only understood each other. And the psychiatrists try to, I think, people go to psychiatrists because they reach an impasse in their relationships. They can't communicate anymore. They don't want to understand, take the time to understand. And I heard somewhere that understanding was going to be the seventh sense that we develop among all the seven senses. We only have 5 right now, but someone said that understanding would be the 7th. And I wanted to read to you a couple lines from a beautiful poem by Rudyard Kipling called If We Only Understood. It says, if we knew the cares and trials, knew the efforts all in vain, and the bitter disappointment, understood the loss and gain, would the grim eternal roughness seem, I wonder, just the same? Should we help others we now hinder? Should we pity where we blame? Could we judge all deeds by motives that surround each other's lives? See the naked heart and spirit, knowing what spur the action gives. Often we would find it better just to judge all actions good. We should love each other better, just to judge all actions good, if we only understood.
That is beautiful, Diane. Did you have any comment on that, Jenny, before we go to David?
No, I sure appreciated it though.
David Grossman?
Oh, thanks. I was just thinking, since we were talking about psychology, we shouldn't leave out Carl Jung. He had a much more transcendent view, certainly, than Skinner and Freud, and he actually wrote a lot about Aquarius himself. And he brought up the symbol of Aquarius, which we haven't mentioned this evening, is the water bearer. You can do with that what you wish, but Jung defined the water bearer as the self. So I thought I would just mention that. And then just the other aspect from the beautiful poem that was just read, Aquarius is also ruled by the planet Uranus, which supposedly is, by some astrologers anyway, described as the higher octave of Mercury, and a very creative force and powerful force. People connect it with the whole age that happened as we move into Aquarius, the amazing discoveries that have changed the world totally technologically over the last 100 years. So I'm just going to mention those two things relating to the Aquarian age.
That was from a whole higher octave right there. Jim and Michelle?
Yes, just a couple of points about therapy and psychologists of the 20th century. It's interesting that they did a study a couple of decades ago in which they tried to test all of the different psychotherapeutic theories across thousands and thousands of patients. And what they ended up concluding is no one particular theory was any more helpful than any other theory. The fundamental reason being the most important thing was not the theoretical framework of the psychologist or the therapist, but whether or not they established a trusting relationship with the client. If the person felt that the person talking to them was genuine and they trusted them, then they healed a lot quicker and they were quite happy with whatever the theory was. Now, if you come forward to Garth Wood, who was a psychiatrist in England and wrote a very challenging book that the American Psychological Society banned called The Illness Excuse. What he points out is he demolishes Freud in about 5 pages, and then he goes on. But what he pointed out was essentially most people, what they really need is moral therapy. And what he meant by that is they need to speak with a trusted friend who will be truthful to them in terms of how they see the problem that they're talking about. And if they have someone that they know cares about them, but is also being truthful, it's usually far more helpful than trying to establish a relationship with a very expensive psychologist. And he said, in reality, truly, there are only 2 real mental illnesses, schizophrenia and manic depressive. He said the rest of them are all completely curable within ordinary framework, as long as you tell people the one thing that's important, he said, and that's my final point. No one ever really said that life was a bed of roses. If you start there, you can usually solve your problem with a good conversation, at least get on the way to doing it.
Who was that, Jim?
I'm sorry?
Who was that you're speaking of? Who wrote this?
Called Garth Wood.
Okay, thank you.
And the title of it was The Myth of Neurosis, The Illness Excuse. And that's where he really does. It's just amazing. It's so theosophical in terms of the concepts that he puts forward in his perceptions. And it's quite remarkable.
So is that like, instead of the devil made me do it, my XYZ ABC made me do it?
Well, he doesn't talk so much about that, except the fact that people have to see that they are fundamentally responsible agents who actually can cure themselves with the intelligent help of someone else who's willing to help them see things as clearly as possible without excuse. And it's all really about truth in a sense. Of course, Viktor Frankl, as was mentioned by someone else, is superb. But anyway, Garth Wood gives a good whole perspective on psychoanalysis and so forth, and he doesn't do it in technical language.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any final questions or comments?
Jonathan, I was just thinking that the reason theosophy is so important is that the Aquarian age begins to precipitate karma and quickens certain kinds of karma. And in order to deal with that, or even to understand it, you need to be in your higher self. And that basically means that, once again, Manas is the focal point for all these challenges and all these knots in the heart, if you want to call it that, which, and it's Manas is the one that has to somehow dissolve some of them.
Thank you very much for that. Now, when Jenny had one of her slides, and I think it was 3 different levels and the occultist was the last one. Can you recall what those 3 different levels were? and what they pertain to?
Well,
Stoic.
it was the Stoic and the Transcendentalist.
That's right. That's from HPB. Yes. Keep going. Sorry.
Um, so are
The
you
Stoics
asking?
said, yeah, the Stoics said responsibility, right? And then the Transcendentalists took it a step further. And what was that step further? I'm sorry.
Faith and responsibility.
Okay, faith and responsibility. And the occultist had something to do with the growth of the best in us, our highest powers unfolding or something.
Sort of like digging in and discovering and using power.
Yeah.
In a helpful way.
Well, and testing it to get knowledge, to acquire true spiritual knowledge by testing.
So this would be like noetic thinking, perhaps. You just higher human powers, because the third object has to do with exploring these powers in nature and man. And a lot of that could think, oh, well, spooky seances, but it could be these higher powers in the human being of, noetic thinking, higher manas, buddhi manas, understanding, as was mentioned regarding Rudyard Kipling. These are what's going to be the healing higher therapy that's going to be released in the coming years and decades and centuries, it sounds to me like. Any final comments, Jenny?
No, just that it seemed like so important for someone who is wanting to take full advantage of the Aquarian period, that this is saying the occultist recognizes his responsibility and is trying with creativity, with dedication to learning to discover who he is, what his possibilities are, and doing that on behalf, the responsibility part is doing that on behalf of others as well. So I thought it was encapsulated a lot about the Aquarian spirit.
Oh yeah, that was out of the ballpark home run, I thought. Okay, well, thank you, Jenny, so much for such an illuminating, thought-provoking, and inspiring investigation into the idea of Aquarian civilization. And it means all so much to us because we don't know what's going on. You watch the news and everything like that, but there's this kind of underground aquifer that is going on, that is healing. And it means there will be an incredible unfolding, it seems like, at least according to your presentation. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Jenny.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you all for coming and for your thoughtful questions and comments.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Robert?
Jenny. Thank you.
Oh, that was yeah.
Bye.
Thank you all. Take care, everybody. And next week it's ULT Day. And I really think that the ideal of the ULT is the very much a focusing of the intention of what it means to express the Aquarian age. So thank you all very much. See you next week. Bye.
Thank you, Jenny.